The morning of September 15th dawned crisp and clear across Pierre, South Dakota, the kind of autumn day that makes politicians dream of photo opportunities and campaign footage. The Prairie Rose Convention Center buzzed with anticipation as workers draped red, white, and blue bunting across the stage, tested microphones, and arranged chairs in perfect rows. This was supposed to be Governor Kristi Noem's triumphant homecoming event, a celebration of her rising national profile and a not-so-subtle launchpad for future presidential aspirations. But even in those early hours, subtle signs suggested this wouldn't be the carefully orchestrated political theater everyone expected. Kennedy Noem arrived at the venue 2 hours before the scheduled start time, her usual composed demeanor replaced by something more intense, more focused. Staff members who had worked with her for years noticed she carried herself differently. Shoulders squared, jaw set, eyes that seemed to look through people rather than at them. She had this energy, recalled Maria Santos, a longtime aide who was setting up registration tables. Not nervous energy, but something deeper, like she was preparing for battle. The venue itself was a testament to Kristi Noem's political evolution. What had once been modest town halls in rural communities had transformed into elaborate productions complete with professional lighting, branded backdrops, and carefully curated guest lists. The guest list for this particular event read like a who's who of conservative politics: major donors from Texas and Florida, Fox News personalities, influential pastors, and rising stars in the Republican Party. They had come to see the woman many considered the future of conservative leadership: tough, photogenic, uncompromising, and blessed with that rare political gift of appearing simultaneously folksy and formidable. As the crowd filed in, the contrast between public perception and private reality became increasingly stark. Kristi Noem worked the room with her signature blend of warmth and authority, shaking hands, posing for selfies, and delivering perfectly crafted sound bites to the handful of national reporters who had made the trip to South Dakota. She wore her trademark blazer, navy blue with gold buttons, and her smile never wavered, even as several attendees noticed Kennedy standing alone near the back of the room, declining offers to join photo opportunities. The governor was in full campaign mode, observed James Mitchell, a political reporter from the Sioux Falls Argus Leader. But there was something off about the family dynamic. Usually, Kennedy was right there beside her mother, part of the show. That day, she kept her distance. The event's carefully planned schedule began with a video montage celebrating Kristi Noem's achievements, from her early days as a rancher's wife to her time in Congress, from her gubernatorial victories to her emergence as a national conservative voice. The crowd cheered at familiar clips: Noem standing up to federal overreach, defending Second Amendment rights, and championing traditional values. But as the video played, Kennedy's expression remained stone-faced, her arms crossed, her gaze fixed not on the screen but on her mother. The first speaker was Senator John Thune, who delivered a rousing introduction that hit all the expected notes. Kristi Noem as a principled leader, a devoted mother, and a rising star who represented the best of American conservatism. The crowd was primed, energized, ready for the main event. But when Kristi Noem took the stage, something unexpected happened. "Before I begin," she announced, "I want to invite my daughter Kennedy to say a few words. She's been such an important part of this journey, and I think you'd all enjoy hearing from the next generation of conservative leadership." The invitation seemed spontaneous, unscripted, a departure from the meticulously planned program. Some later speculated that Kristi had sensed the tension and hoped to diffuse it by giving Kennedy a platform. Others believed she was simply following her political instincts, recognizing an opportunity to showcase the family values that had become central to her brand. Kennedy stood slowly, her movements deliberate and measured. The applause was polite, but uncertain. The crowd wasn't sure what to expect from this unscheduled appearance. As she walked to the podium, her mother stepped aside with an encouraging smile, perhaps expecting the kind of brief, supportive remarks that had become routine at these events. "I need to tell the truth today," Kennedy began, her voice carrying clearly through the microphone system. "Not because it's easy, and certainly not because it's comfortable, but because silence has become a kind of betrayal. The transformation in the room was immediate and visceral. The comfortable murmur of a friendly crowd gave way to absolute silence. Phone cameras that had been casually recording suddenly focused with laser intensity. Kristi Noem's smile flickered, replaced by a look of confusion that quickly shifted to concern. For years, Kennedy continued, her voice growing stronger with each word, I stood next to my mother as a symbol, an accessory to her image. But today, I stand apart from her, and I stand for the truth. What followed was not a political speech, but a personal reckoning, delivered with the kind of raw honesty that rarely penetrates the carefully controlled world of modern politics. Kennedy spoke about the gradual erosion of authenticity she had witnessed, the way political calculation had slowly replaced genuine conviction in her mother's decision-making process. I remember when she first ran for governor, Kennedy said, her voice taking on a nostalgic quality that made the personal nature of her testimony even more poignant. She talked about serving the people, about making tough decisions based on what was right, not what was popular. I believed in that woman. I worked for that woman. I defended that woman. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Some attendees looked toward the exits, unsure whether they should be witnessing this family drama. Others leaned forward, transfixed by the unprecedented nature of what was unfolding. But somewhere along the way, Kennedy continued, that woman got lost. She got lost in the lights and the cameras and the constant need to perform. And I got lost too, lost in the role I was supposed to play, the image I was supposed to project, the lies I was supposed to tell. Kennedy's speech was devastating, not because of its emotional intensity, but because of its specificity. She didn't deal in generalities or vague accusations. Instead, she detailed specific instances where she felt her mother had compromised her principles for political gain. She spoke about the controversial decision to support a pipeline project that would have negatively impacted Native American communities in the state. I sat in the meetings, Kennedy revealed. I saw the environmental impact reports. I heard the concerns from tribal leaders, and I watched my mother ignore all of it because the donors wanted that pipeline built. She described how her own role in the governor's office had become increasingly ceremonial, how her policy recommendations were dismissed if they didn't align with the political messaging of the day. I was hired to be a policy analyst, she said, but what I really was a prop, a way for her to show that she was mentoring the next generation, while actually silencing any voice that challenged her decisions. The audience was transfixed by the specificity of her accusations. This wasn't political theater or strategic positioning. It was a daughter's honest account of watching her mother's moral compass gradually spin out of control. You told the world you were building a legacy, Kennedy said, her voice cracking with emotion. But what you built was a brand that sacrificed truth and sometimes even your family to stay in power. Throughout Kennedy's speech, Kristi Noem remained seated in the front row, her face cycling through a range of emotions: surprise, hurt, anger, and finally, something that looked like resignation. Her hands were clenched in her lap, knuckles white against the fabric of her dress. Several times she appeared to be on the verge of standing, of interrupting, of taking control of the situation in the way that had made her such an effective political operator. But she didn't. Perhaps she recognized that any attempt to silence her daughter would only validate Kennedy's accusations. Perhaps she was simply too stunned to react. Or perhaps, in some deep part of herself, she knew that Kennedy was telling the truth. The moment that broke her came when Kennedy delivered what would become the most quoted line of the entire speech. I wasn't your daughter in those moments. I was a prop, and I can't do it anymore. The words hung in the air, like smoke from a fire that had been burning for years. The audience held its collective breath, and then, in a moment that would be replayed across the internet a million times over, Kristi Noem stood. She didn't speak. She didn't approach the microphone. She didn't even look at her daughter. Instead, she walked directly toward the side exit, her heels clicking against the hard floor of the convention center. The sound seemed impossibly loud in the stunned silence of the room. As she reached the exit, tears were clearly visible on her cheeks. The woman who had built a reputation on toughness, on never showing weakness, on being the ultimate political professional, was crying in front of hundreds of people and dozens of cameras. Kennedy remained at the podium for several minutes after her mother's departure, not speaking, but simply standing there, as if she needed time to process what had just happened. The audience was equally frozen, unsure how to respond to this unprecedented breach of political decorum. Finally, Kennedy spoke again, her voice quieter now, but no less determined. "I know this is uncomfortable," she said. "I know this isn't what you came here to see, but sometimes the truth is uncomfortable. Sometimes it's messy. Sometimes it breaks things that need to be broken." She paused, looking out at the sea of faces, some sympathetic, some shocked, some angry. "I'm not running for anything. I'm not trying to build my own political career on the ruins of my mother's. I'm just trying to be honest, maybe for the first time in my adult life." The crowd began to stir as Kennedy left the podium. Some people applauded, a scattered, uncertain sound. Others sat in stunned silence. A few got up and walked out, apparently unable to process what they had just witnessed. In the hours that followed, the story exploded across social media. Hashtags like Kennedy Noem Truth and Kristi Breakdown began trending nationally. The video of Kristi Noem's tearful exit was shared millions of times, often accompanied by commentary that ranged from sympathetic to savage. The national media's response was swift and overwhelming. Within hours, news crews were descending on Pierre, South Dakota, a small city that rarely finds itself at the center of national political coverage. The Prairie Rose Convention Center, still decorated with the abandoned remnants of what was supposed to be a celebration, became an impromptu press center. CNN's Jake Tapper led his show that evening with the story, calling it one of the most dramatic and unexpected moments in recent political history. Fox News found itself in the awkward position of covering a story that reflected poorly on one of their favorite guests, with some hosts defending Kristi Noem and others praising Kennedy's courage. The story transcended traditional partisan lines. Liberal commentators saw it as validation of their critiques of conservative family values hypocrisy. Conservative voices were divided, some defending Kristi Noem as a victim of an unfair public attack, others praising Kennedy for her commitment to truth and principle. But perhaps the most interesting response came from ordinary Americans who saw something in Kennedy's speech that went beyond politics. On social media, hundreds of people shared their own stories of family members who had been changed by power, of relationships damaged by ambition, of the difficulty of speaking truth to those we love. In the days following the speech, Kennedy Noem was inundated with interview requests from major news outlets. She was selective in her responses, choosing to speak with journalists who she felt would focus on the substance of her concerns rather than the sensational aspects of the family drama. In an interview with NPR's Mary Louise Kelly, Kennedy was careful to contextualize her actions. "People will say I embarrassed her," she said. "But the truth is I've been swallowing my own embarrassment for years. Every time I smiled next to her and didn't speak out about policies I knew were harmful. Every time I stayed silent when I should have spoken up." She was particularly thoughtful when discussing the personal cost of her decision. "I love my mother," she said. "That's what makes this so hard. If I didn't love her, if I didn't believe she was capable of being better, I wouldn't have risked everything to try to reach her." Kennedy also used her platform to address broader questions about authenticity in politics. "We've created a system where politicians are rewarded for staying on message, for never admitting mistakes, for maintaining a perfect image," she said. "But that's not how real people live. Real people struggle with difficult decisions. Real people make mistakes and learn from them. Real people change their minds when they get new information." Meanwhile, Kristi Noem entered what her staff described as a period of reflection and reassessment. She canceled all public appearances for the following week, including a scheduled appearance at the Conservative Political Action Conference and several fundraising events. Her office released a brief statement thanking supporters for their continued faith in her leadership and asking for privacy during a difficult time. But the statement was notably lacking in any direct response to Kennedy's specific accusations. Behind the scenes, sources close to the governor described a woman who was devastated by her daughter's public criticism. "She never saw it coming," said one senior aide who requested anonymity. "She thought the tensions between them were normal family stuff, the kind of thing that gets worked out privately. She had no idea Kennedy felt this strongly about these issues." The silence from Kristi Noem's camp became its own story. Political analysts noted that her failure to directly address Kennedy's accusations was unusual for a politician known for her combative style and willingness to engage critics. As the initial shock of Kennedy's speech began to fade, political observers started to analyze its broader implications. The incident highlighted growing tensions within the Republican Party between traditional conservative values and the demands of modern political celebrity. What Kennedy described is happening all over politics, said Dr. Sarah Chen, a political scientist at the University of South Dakota. Politicians become brands, and brands require constant maintenance. Sometimes that maintenance comes at the cost of authenticity, of family relationships, of the very values that got them into politics in the first place. The story also resonated with young Americans who were increasingly skeptical of traditional political institutions. Kennedy's willingness to speak truth to power, even when that power was wielded by her own mother, struck a chord with a generation that valued authenticity over loyalty. On college campuses across the country, Kennedy's speech became a topic of discussion in political science classes, ethics courses, and family studies programs. Her decision to prioritize truth over family loyalty sparked debates about the nature of civic duty and personal integrity. 6 months after the speech, its impact on both women's lives had become clear. Kennedy had largely withdrawn from public life, declining most interview requests and focusing on her work with a nonprofit organization dedicated to government transparency. She had moved out of South Dakota, taking a position with a think tank in Washington, D.C. Kristi Noem, meanwhile, had gradually returned to public life, but her political trajectory had been fundamentally altered. Her approval ratings in South Dakota had dropped significantly, and talk of presidential ambitions had largely disappeared. Several major donors had withdrawn their support, citing concerns about her family situation and questions about her character. The relationship between mother and daughter remained strained. They had not spoken publicly since the incident, and sources close to both women suggested that reconciliation, if it came at all, would be a long process. Perhaps the most significant aspect of Kennedy Noem's speech was not its immediate political impact, but its broader message about the importance of truth in public life. In an era of increasing polarization and political performance, her willingness to speak honestly about difficult truths offered a different model for civic engagement. Kennedy showed us that sometimes the most patriotic thing you can do is refuse to participate in a lie, said Dr. Michael Rodriguez, a professor of political ethics at Georgetown University. Even when that lie is comfortable, even when it serves your interests, even when it protects people you love. The speech also demonstrated the power of authentic communication in an age of manufactured political messaging. Kennedy's words resonated not because they were polished or focus grouped, but because they were true. In a political landscape dominated by artificial personas and scripted interactions, her raw honesty stood out like a beacon. As Kennedy Noem continues to navigate her post-political life, her speech at the Prairie Rose Convention Center remains a defining moment in contemporary American politics. It was a reminder that behind every political figure is a human being, with all the complexity, contradictions, and capacity for growth that humanity implies. The speech was also a testament to the power of courage, the courage to speak truth to power, even when that power is wielded by someone you love. Kennedy's decision to prioritize integrity over loyalty, truth over comfort, authenticity over image, cost her dearly in personal terms. But it also freed her from the burden of living a lie. In the end, Kennedy Noem's speech was about more than politics, more than family drama, more than the fall of a rising political star. It was about the fundamental human need to live honestly, to speak truthfully, and to refuse to be complicit in systems that demand we sacrifice our integrity for the sake of appearances. Whether Kennedy Noem ever returns to public life, whether she writes a book or gives more speeches or simply fades into private life, her moment at that podium will be remembered as a rare instance of authentic truth-telling in an age of political performance. And perhaps that's exactly what America needed to hear. In a world of manufactured moments and scripted authenticity, Kennedy Noem offered something increasingly rare: the truth, unvarnished and uncompromising, delivered with the kind of courage that can only come from someone who has finally decided to stop pretending. And maybe, in the end, that's the most powerful political statement of all.